I'm a big believer in second chances, even for people who commit serious crimes. Who deserves a second chance? Who gets one? And who decides? I'm Jessica Henry, and I'll be your host of Just Justice. I'm a former public defender, a professor of justice studies, and an award-winning author. And I'm excited for us to find new ways to put justice back into our criminal legal system. Hello and welcome to Just Justice. My name is Jessica Henry and I'll be your host. Today we have the pleasure of talking with Alexandra Bailey, who works at the Sentencing Project as a senior campaign strategist, where she supports state and local advocates working to challenge the nation's sentencing laws. Alex works to end life without parole, cap maximum prison penalties at 20 years, promote second look provisions, and foster a cultural shift that rejects excessive punishment in favor of restorative approaches to public safety. Prior to joining the Sentencing Project, Alex was a campaign strategist and national organizing specialist for the ACLU, and she helped coordinate the Women's March in Chicago. She has used her organizing expertise to win campaigns, including voting rights for unhoused citizens and the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment in Illinois. Alex also is an advisory commissioner in Washington, D.C.'s Ward 2. She studied organizing and political change theory at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Welcome to the show, Alex. I can't wait to hear all about your work in Oklahoma and what you're doing with the Sentencing Project.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm very pleased to be here.
And before we get started talking about all the interesting and important work you're doing, I did just want to warn the folks who are listening that today's program contains discussions about intimate partner violence and may be upsetting to some people in the audience. So today we're going to be talking in part about the Oklahoma Survivors Act, what it is and how it passed and why it's so important. But before we get there, Alex, could you set the stage for us about what was happening in Oklahoma, specifically with regard to women in the state of Oklahoma?
Yeah, absolutely. So as the senior campaign strategist for our extreme sentencing division, I am charged with finding opportunities somewhere in the nation, anywhere in the nation, where we feel that we can really take a bite out of our nation's reliance on mass incarceration and extreme sentencing. Oklahoma was really just kind of a God moment, just really fortuitous, because I was sitting in my office and I was going through sort of my Google alerts, and I come across this article in Mother Jones about a law called Failure to Protect. And the article is about a woman who was in a highly abusive situation. And unfortunately, her kid was hurt during that situation. She was given an extremely long prison term, and the children were actually returned to her former partner who had already served a prison term for abusing her. And so one of the attorneys that was highlighted in this segment on Mother Jones was a woman named Colleen McCarty, who was the brand new executive director of Oklahoma Appleseed. And so I was so incredibly incensed by this article. I got on my phone with everyone I know in Appleseed chapters across the country, and I was like, who has Colleen McCarty's phone number? I know somebody has it. And so I cold called her and I said, you don't know me. My name's Alexandra Bailey. I'm the campaign strategist at the Sentencing Project. And I think what I was reading about was just awful. And then I did a little bit more research, and it turned out that Oklahoma was number one for domestic violence, that it always ranked somewhere near the top for domestic violence-related homicide, that it also usually ranked somewhere near the top for children that were killed in domestic violence incidences. And sort of the statistics just got worse from there. It also had long been the leading incarcerator of women in the country. And this failure to protect law pretty much only affected women being incarcerated. So I said to Colleen, what if we do a Domestic Violence Survivor Justice Act similar to what was passed in New York State? And she said, you're on. So that was the day we pinky swore and jumped off the cliff.
It's amazing that A little article in a magazine could have so sparked what became a movement in Oklahoma. It's such an impactful law, and it's kind of an extraordinary thing. So we're going to fast forward to May 2024 when the governor signed into law the Oklahoma Survivors Act. And I want you to first tell us what it is, and then I want to go back and talk about really I was going to say crazy, but that I don't want to say crazy, but
No, you nailed that. That's exactly the correct word.
the crazy path, the circuitous path, the stunning path that led to its passage. But first, tell us, what is this Oklahoma Survivors Act?
Well, the Oklahoma Survivor Justice Act does two very important things. The first is, in a state that is number one in domestic violence, what we don't want to do going forward is extremely punish survivors for doing what they need to do to preserve their life or their children's lives. Now, so many people go, well, what about stand your ground or self-defense? Well, I couldn't tell you, but it just doesn't seem to be working for women who save their own lives, not just in Oklahoma, but around the country. So going forward, they would have what's called an affirmative defense. The scope of my punishment should be less, sir, because this situation was a domestic violence situation where I was forced to save my own life, to save my children's life, or I was coerced and forced into the behavior that you are now holding me accountable for. And then retroactivity also exists in the bill, which allows us to go back and look at offenses of people who are currently incarcerated to review whether or not domestic violence was a significant contributing factor to their underlying offense. And if it was, they have the opportunity to be resentenced, to have a lesser punishment and potentially come home.
Just to make sure that our listeners are understanding. So if a woman commits a crime, let's say a homicide or an assault in reaction to a domestic violence situation, and she herself winds up being charged, the Oklahoma Survivors Act gives her an avenue for an affirmative defense. Does that mean that she would be without any culpability at all, or does it reduce the level of culpability?
It reduces the level of culpability. She would not be without punishment, but the punishment would be, I don't want to say just, because it's not just, because those situations are just so unjust, but it makes the world slightly more just. But I think one of the easiest ways to always sort of make people understand this law is through stories. And so, like, just to give you like a quick example of somebody whose case has been filed recently and who's been granted a hearing, her name is Lisa Moss. Lisa was brutally mistreated by her then husband. And again, this is very graphic, so trigger warning for audience members, but raping her with a curling iron was something that he enjoyed doing. It was also discovered by Lisa that he was sexually assaulting their prepubescent daughter.
Oh my gosh.
And so Lisa did what a lot of people, I think, would do. She went to her brother and she cried and she said, I don't know what to do. And her brother took it into his own hands and decided that he was going to kill her husband. She was not even present at the time, nor was she aware that he planned to do this. But she was tried and convicted of first-degree conspiracy to commit homicide and felony murder, which in Oklahoma carries a maximum penalty of life without the possibility of parole. And she has been in prison for more than 2 decades at this juncture. So when you look at a case like that, that's the kind of thing you want to go back and take a look at, because what we know and understand now, hopefully we would not treat that case the same in this day and age. We would take a look at a situation like that and say, that's horrific. And also the scope of her culpability in that offense is minimal, if present at all, depending on what prosecutor and judge you're talking to. But just so your audience kind of understands what we're talking about, when we're talking about these offenses, they are usually some of the most brutal and violent things that I have ever heard happen to people. And the criminalization of those survivors really just makes my blood boil, quite frankly.
Right. And so in Lisa's case, just to sort of play this all out, so she'll get an opportunity, hopefully to get a hearing and have a judge actually contextualize what happened, reweigh her culpability using modern understanding of what the impact of abuse on behavior, and then would have the ability to resentence her to something different. And on the front end, someone who had a new charge, a judge now would be empowered to take that context into account and maybe not sentence her or not even have her convicted of those highest counts because the abuse would be a mitigating factor. I got it. That's amazing. And it's amazing that it got passed. So how did it get passed? Because to be clear, I live in New Jersey. So many of the things in Oklahoma in particular, me and Oklahoma have a very interesting relationship, which we can talk about a little bit, but I'm also a big death penalty opponent, and Oklahoma just leaves me scratching my head all the time. So Oklahoma is not a progressive state, particularly in the context of criminal justice. It's just not. And what's fascinating, right, is that from what I understand, a petition gets circulated to pass this Oklahoma Survivors Act, and like 20,000 Oklahomans sign this petition. It gets passed somehow, which I want to hear more about, through the Oklahoma Senate in a unanimous vote, 38-0. It gets passed through the Oklahoma House of Representatives, 86-4. So this is like kind of a sweepingly popular bill. And then Governor Stitz vetoes the bill when it hits its desk. Can you tell us about that? Like, why would the governor veto a bill that had so much popular support and legislative support? And how did it even happen that the bill had so much legislative support in such a conservative state? Tell me, I don't understand, and I am fascinated.
You know, you would have to hang out with the Oklahoma Survivors Coalition to understand just how truly badass this group of individuals are, how dedicated they have been to making Oklahoma a better place long before Johnny come lately, meaning me, showed up on the scene. But the first year that we ran this bill, so it took us 28 months to pass this bill.
And I want to be clear, 28 months in the scheme of the universe is not a lot when you are introducing from whole cloth a brand new idea, and pretty progressive one at that.
I mean, you know, the thing is that maybe it's a progressive one, but I think for me, it just makes sense. In a state where 1 in 2 women is going to experience domestic violence and 47% of men are going to experience domestic violence, maybe the thing that we should be focusing on is what we're going to do about that domestic violence and where it leads, as opposed to the criminalization of those people. Because clearly, when you're number one, your carceral system is not slowing down your problem. But the first year we ran this bill, I warned our coalition about this, you know, based on what New York State had faced in attempting to pass this bill. Bills like this are difficult because they're a run on people's records. It's basically going back and saying, did you prosecute a woman who was being raped with a curling iron? Who all she did was tell her brother, which is what most people would do, that she was devastated, that she couldn't escape her husband who was sexually assaulted, and you put her in prison. And not only did you put her in prison, you put her in prison for life. That's one heck of a thing to have to go back and take a look at. And if you were an actor in that situation, I think that's, you know, one of those kind of come to Jesus moments in your career. Now, to my mind, if you're a decent person, we all have our come to Jesus moments and we all misjudge things and we all make mistakes. And the whole point of these laws is to realize that the system is not perfect. And sometimes we need to go back and clean up our own mess. But the prosecutors fought us. They fought us fiercely. And they said to Colleen and I point blank, they were like, basically like, little girls, all you're going to get is a bill with no retroactivity, meaning nobody who's currently incarcerated is going to be able to apply. And we'll put a law that like maybe sort of a judge can kind of take it into consideration going forward if he feels like it. And Colleen calls me. She and I are both devastated. And she says, you know, this is Oklahoma. Maybe this is all we get. And I basically said to her, I was like hell. I said, tell the floor leader to kill the bill. We'll be back next legislative session and we'll be ready for him. And so we came back the next legislative session, like literally all guns blazing. And we got the floor leader of the House, John Eccles, and the pro tem of the Senate, Senator Treat, to be our bill sponsors. For those of you who are not in politics or policy, basically those are two of the most powerful people in the state legislature. If you want a bill to get heard or scheduled in either the Senate or the House, you have to go through them. And so they hold a lot of power.
So how did you get them to agree? I mean, how did that happen?
So I was invited very generously to be the keynote speaker at the YWCA luncheon in Oklahoma for domestic violence survivors, because the YWCA is the organization that basically helps people get out of these situations, find a new home, etc. And I'm a domestic violence survivor. I'm coming up on 5 years in November of being safe. And so they invited me to give a keynote. And so I told my story. And I said to the legislators, I said, the right thing is always hard, but it should be very clear to you that this is the right thing. And if you're going to do anything in your career, standing up for people who are going through this seems pretty 101. So I said, look at the photos of these women, look at what happened to them, and don't look away. Don't look away. Do something about it. And Senator Treat subsequently has shared that his wife grew up in a home with extreme domestic violence, and he was very sort of moved by this, having touched these issues. And then John Eccles, who was the floor leader, when Senator Treat came on board, he was like, yeah, this is a great bill. And the pro tems on the one side, yeah, I definitely got you on the other side. And so the two of them were just unmovable when it came to this bill. And every single time anybody spouted any crap, we were like, that's not true. This is what's actually happening. The Sentencing Project ran over 9 million ads in the state educating people about domestic violence and the truth about the bill and the stories of the people that it could potentially help. We were all over the news cycle, and we had a lot of allies there. And the coalition had broad support ranging from like the left of the left, think like ACLU Oklahoma, and like, Black Lives Matter, all the way to Right on Crime and CPAC, which is the Conservative Political Action Committee. And so like we came all guns blazing. And I had two lobbyists. I didn't have one lobbyist. I had two lobbyists, one to work the House, one to work the Senate. We're all over the news. I am pumping ads into this state at a rate, like as fast as I can get Facebook to approve them. The women are organizing inside and putting their stories out there. The lawyers are all like gearing up and educating other attorneys. And we get to the Senate and it's a unanimous vote. And it's just like, wow. And then we get to the House, 4 no votes. Okay, well, those 4 people can go away. And then I'm sitting there that night and I just have this terrible feeling. And then my phone dings. Your bill's been vetoed. And I called Colleen McCarty and I was like, you gotta be kidding me with this. And she was like, well, I guess it's over. And again, I was like hell, the session's not over. So we called Senator Treat and we said, will you do an override? Will you override the governor? And he's like, you got it. So within the space of 48 hours, the Senate had overridden the governor's veto unanimously. Then that put the governor and the House in a space where we could kind of do one of two things. We can either get into a fight and accuse you of being against survivors and all of these sorts of things, or we could make a few minor tweaks to the bill, pass it through, and everybody can be friends again. And that's what we decided to do. So the last 2 weeks of session, we got the legislation through. We got an almost immediate implementation date. The bill passed in May. We started implementing in August.
Wow. I mean, that's just amazing. And how has implementation been going?
Well, the great thing about our coalition, again, is that we just have so many badass attorneys. I mean, just Gotham needs them level attorneys. And they were with us from the very beginning, and they were ready to rock and roll the second this bill passed. And because we had a few months before the bill implemented, we were really able to do some education inside about folks about like who's eligible, what's the best path forward, how to do this. And I don't know if you want to read 500 pages of a sentencing petition, but they're masterful and they're incredibly well written and well researched. And I am praying, but also fighting to make sure that they're successful.
You told us a story about Lisa Moss, who you said has been granted the first hearing, right?
Yes.
Which is
She's not the first
amazing.
to apply, but she's the first to be granted. Yeah.
So not the first to apply, but the first to be granted. And I know there was another woman in Oklahoma, April Wilkins, whose story was one of the stories that sort of propelled this bill. Can you tell us a little bit about her and what's happening with her story or what's happening with her case?
Well, yeah, for your listeners, and again, this is very graphic, but April Wilkins, you should see a photo of her before she went to prison. I mean, like, legitimately stunning. Graduate of a top university, creating prosthetics for a living. And so she goes to buy herself a new car, and she meets the son of Oklahoma's wealthiest car dealer. Handsome, rich guy. Why not, right? Turns out he had a very terrible history of abusing women. And April was not spared from that. He stalked her, he beat her, he raped her. She had multiple restraining orders, multiple rape kits, multiple calls to 911. I believe her sentencing package includes 30 plus victims to her abuse. And the sort of penultimate event came when he dragged her down to his basement, handcuffed her, and sexually assaulted her at gunpoint. It was found in his autopsy that he had 2 illegal Class A substances in his system. He's dragging her to the sofa for what will be the second sexual assault of the evening, when she manages to wrestle the gun off him while handcuffed. She flips the gun in her hands and she lands multiple shots to the body. She doesn't flee the scene, she calls the cops. When they arrive, she's raped and beat to hell. And they decided to charge her with first-degree aggravated homicide, which comes with a life sentence. And I think a lot of that has to do with who she killed. When I heard her story, it was just one of the grossest things I think I'd ever heard. And going through her case files, it was like she just begged and pleaded with the system to help her. She did everything we tell women they're supposed to do. And all it got her was worse stalking and more bodily harm. He would break into her house on a regular basis and destroy it. She was afraid for her life. She was afraid for her son's life. She just lived in terror. And then that night, he said, after I'm done raping you, I'm going to kill you. And fortunately, she won that fight. She didn't die, but she's spending her life in prison. She was the first survivor to file a petition under this act. She has not yet been granted a hearing. We are pushing and shoving for one. But I very much, very much look forward to welcoming April home. She deserves to have her life back.
Yeah. So that's just a couple of examples of how this law can really impact people. And sounds like the filings are going strong and at least the first hearing's been granted. It's a very new bill. So we will keep an eye on how that's going. Now, I heard something, and I'm hoping it's not true, but maybe you can clarify. I heard that at least in Tulsa, that the Tulsa DA has been asking people to waive those rights, the rights that they've been given under the Oklahoma Domestic Survivors Act to get a plea deal? Is that true?
That is absolutely true, unfortunately.
So what does that mean?
So basically, what they're attempting to do in the hope of saving themselves work later is to ensure that somebody waives their rights. So basically, what they're saying is, look, most cases settle out of court. I don't know if most people know that, right? But most cases don't go to trial. They're settled between defense attorneys and DAs where they strike a deal. And basically what the DA is saying is, if you want a deal from me, you have to sign away your rights under this act. That is one of the conditions of you receiving this deal. Oof, not only was I incensed, but we just went on a full frontal attack on that. It was in the Huffington Post. There was a piece recently done in Slate magazine about April Wilkins' case by Rachel Zaro that I highly recommend folks go and read. But again, we knew that folks would not want to have their records reviewed in who they had prosecuted and what they had done. And the thing is that I would just be so incredibly impressed If a DA were to come forward and be like, look, I got these 4 attorneys in my office going through all these cases just to make sure that even if it wasn't me, sometime down the line, this didn't happen. Criminalizing survivors didn't happen in our office. And we'll get back to you. Like as soon as we possibly can. Like to me, that's the appropriate response. If my job is to protect public safety, as many prosecutors see it, if my job is to protect public safety, if my job is to see that justice is done, and it has been decided by the state legislature that this is not justice and the general public, then it is my job as an elected official to go and do that will. But tell that to a lot of the DAs.
Oh my goodness. Well, again, something to keep an eye on as we watch the implementation of this in Oklahoma. I kind of want to talk to you more about your work, what you're doing nationally. But before we get there, can we just stay with Oklahoma? And again, I am from New Jersey, but I'm a scholar of, among other things, the death penalty. And Oklahoma is second in the nation only to Texas in its use of the death penalty and in terms of its execution rates. In September, they executed Emmanuel Antonio Littlejohn, a case that so many of us were just like, why would you do this? But they did. And so I'm just wondering, hearing that Oklahoma is the state with the highest rates of incarceration for women, it's one of the most frequent users of executions to punish. Now I'm learning, I think our listeners are learning, it's #1 state or one of the #1 states for domestic violence rates. What do you think it is that makes it a state that is so oriented towards punishment? It's just not something I can understand. Sitting here in New Jersey, I don't understand.
Well, my family's originally from Louisiana, so I come from a Southern mentality. For a long time, and I don't think this was just Oklahoma, I think for a long time we had this tough on crime narrative. New Jersey had it too. Every state just kind of took it to its cultural conclusion. So if you're already conservative and you believe that the way that you're going to solve crime, the way that you're going to keep the public safe, the way that you're going to resolve things like domestic violence is through prosecution and incarceration, and that the higher your penalties are, the more you are going to deter people from committing these acts, the better off your state's going to be, the safer your state's going to be. Well, we've given that the college try for about the last 50 years or so, and it's just not the case. The relationship between incarceration and public safety is a weak one at best. But if you've built an entire political career on that policy position, that's one heck of a thing to walk back after your state and the nation has spent billions, if not trillions of dollars conducting this. Now, in Oklahoma City alone, I believe this is the data from 2023. Don't quote me, I think it was 2023. There were 40,000 phone calls alone to 911 around domestic violence incidences. There were less than 1,000 prosecutions. So that leaves 39,000 phone calls, cries for help, unanswered. The thing I love about this bill and bills like it is that it really raises the essential question. You set up a system of incarceration up to the death penalty. Is that actually accomplishing what you want? If you have 40,000 calls for help,
In one city, right? From Oklahoma City, right?
39,000 of those cries for help go unaddressed or unheard. So then the question becomes, what do you want to spend your money on? DIVIS and the YWCA in Oklahoma do a phenomenal job within their capacity to respond to domestic violence survivors. I mean, they are the gold standard. They even have at one of their homes that women can go to a place to keep farm animals. Because a lot of times survivors don't want to leave without their pets because their pets will get killed. So like they had goats and like chickens and things like that at the shelter. Okay, that is really going above and beyond to make sure that people feel comfortable that they can leave, right? But they hadn't gotten a raise in their funding in like 2 decades. This legislation passes and they got a multi-million-dollar raise. That is a much better way, arguably, for a state to spend its money.
And incarcerating people, which costs, depending on the state, 40,000, 50,000, 80,000, depends on where you are. It can be very expensive.
If we take the dollar amount out of it, which the dollar amount does matter to a lot of people, but I'm talking about the moral risk, the moral exposure. that you allow yourself and your constituency and your government to have when you have one tool, and that's to punish. And what has happened in these cases shows you the moral consequences for responding in that way. And so I'm hoping that this bill was the first step in what I hope will be many steps to a much more common sense, just, transparent, and equitable system. I mean, and not just for Oklahoma, but for a lot of states around the country. And I like the fact that it really doesn't matter whether you're the bluest of the blue or the reddest of the red. America has a mass incarceration problem. And it's not catching the people you think it is necessarily.
Yeah, that's right. And so actually, that's a great segue, because one of the things I'd like to know is, are there any other states outside of Oklahoma that are also passing survivor second chance bills?
Yeah, I stay busy. I tell you what, I earn my paycheck. So we have a phenomenal coalition in Connecticut. We were actually working on drafting our legislation today, and we actually flew Representative John Echols out from Oklahoma to have a conversation about the conservative case for domestic violence and resentencing laws, which was very successful. You know, Yale is arguably has a very, let's say, liberal leaning reputation at this juncture in its history. And John Echols is somebody who has an extremely high CPAC rating. I believe CPAC described him as a true conservative. And so what I love about this issue is that it's about the system and whether or not it's doing what it needs to do. And it's not. And that doesn't matter if you're from Connecticut that barely has a Republican, or whether you're in Oklahoma that barely has a Democrat, right? But we're also running a second look bill in Michigan. Michigan is a very unique state because they didn't have a constitutional public defender service until about 10 years ago. They also are the home to the largest class action lawsuit that was ever filed from people who are incarcerated because women were being so systematically sexually abused and raped in the women's prison that incarcerated women literally became millionaires. And winning a case from prison as an incarcerated person is almost impossible.
Very difficult.
So for that judgment to come back as it did, the abuse had to be so flagrant as to be truly undeniable. And it was. Our Massachusetts coalition is also working on legislation of this type. We're seeing it sprout up all over the place, which is exactly what I was hoping for. Our partners in Texas are working on how they can possibly expand protections and second chances for survivors beyond the governor's clemency program for survivors. We're working on the same thing in Louisiana so that we can model Oklahoma. I love it when we're on a roll.
So in all of those states, they're looking at passing some form of domestic survivor violence.
Well, now my favorite thing is they're trying to outdo each other. They're like, well, New York required 2 pieces of evidence, so we're going to require 1. And their sentencing matrix looks like this, so we're going to do one better. Or, you know, we're going to be more trauma informed. And I'm like, everybody fight it out. You do that.
Great. So it sounds like things are percolating all over the place. And that's really fascinating to me because, you know, you're an organizer with years and years and years of political organizing under your belt. How is it to be an organizer in this election cycle? That's got to be an interesting moment in time to be pushing for anything that's new in the states.
If you wait for the perfect moment, you'll be waiting for forever. There is no perfect moment. The perfect moment is always now.
And yet there is a very tumultuous election brewing where everyone seems so polarized, and being able to come around any particular issue to coalesce around anything really does seem sort of remarkable in this particular moment in time.
You know, it's very interesting because it's kind of hard to view yourself, to like evaluate yourself in a lot of instances because I'm so deeply in it in both red and blue places. And to me, this is just common sense of how a person of any stripe would want to live. And so I always approach it from that angle. And the sentencing project itself is nonpartisan. And we don't electioneer. My job is to stick to the issues. And so that's really what I do. I stick to the issue. And quite frankly, I don't give a darn who you are. My question is, are you going to do the right thing?
Is there a similar thing happening at all in the federal system? Like, I know most of these types of crimes occur at the state level. What's happening in the federal system?
There is a federal DVSJA bill, which Oklahoma has joined after the passage in a state. So I'm hoping that they will create a truly robust and just bill for the federal system, but it has not yet happened.
What else are you working on? Is your role right now exclusively focusing on getting survivor bills passed, or are you doing any other kinds of work that we should just be on the lookout for?
Well, Michigan is not just about survivors. It's about a full-blown Second Look Act, which allows judges to go back and look at anyone who is serving more than 20 years of incarceration. And they needed a more robust bill for the simple reason that they had an unconstitutional defender service, and there were just so many things wrong with this system. We have a second look bill going on in Maryland. We also have a second look bill going on in New York State, where we're also trying to repeal mandatory minimums because New York actually has one of the highest rates of mandatory minimums in the country and actually has one of the largest innocence problems because of them. And by innocence problems, I mean people who are innocent who have gone to prison for crimes they have not committed. And we're slowly chipping away at extreme sentencing everywhere we can. I lend a hand everywhere I can. I have a loved one serving life without the possibility of parole, and I was actually one of his victims. And I've truly seen the people's personal capacity to change and to be better and to take responsibility and to grow. And I really believe in that. And sort of like off topic, my work hat off, I'm also a Christian, and I was told how many times I'm supposed to forgive people and how many chances we're supposed to give folks. And basically, we shouldn't give up on people. So that might make me sound like a Pollyanna, but the legislation still gets passed, even if I am a Pollyanna.
And I think the world could use a few more Pollyannas right now. And I'm sorry that you've had these personal experiences that have brought you to this place, but what a fierce advocate you are for second chances, and what a clear vision you have laid out for us, I think, to understand that people do change and that transformation is possible, and that punishment in prison is really only one, as you said, one tool in a tool chest that really could be filled with so many other things as well.
And New Jersey's going to have a second look bill. Let's get it passed, Jersey.
I'm from here. I mean, all we could do is keep working at it.
Let's get it done, Jersey.
Let's get it done. Well, thank you so much, Alex, for being on the show with us today. It was such a pleasure talking with you. Your work is so important and interesting. And thank you again.
It was really my pleasure. And thank you for everything that you're doing in New Jersey for second chances and for inviting me.
A pleasure. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Just Justice. If you like what you heard, please follow us wherever you listen to podcasts and tell a friend. To share an idea for the show or to stay in touch, head to jessicahenryjustice.com or find me on the socials at Jessica Henry Justice. See you next time.